Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Natural Science today. We're on grade 8. We're doing revision on balance in the ecosystems. I'm Arifa Hasaji, and I'm going to take you through balance in the ecosystems, adaptations, and conservation of an ecosystem. We know that there are certain relationships in an ecosystem, the feeding relationships that we discussed yesterday. So I'm going to do a quick recap of it. We learned that plants are producers, and they are producers basically because they make their own food. We also learned that animals are consumers. They obtain food from plants either directly, such as a herbivore, or indirectly, like a carnivore. Now, herbivores, they feed on plants, while carnivores, they feed on other animals, living or dead. They are grouped into predators. Now, predators hunt other animals, which is their prey, for example, lions and leopards. Then we have scavengers. Scavengers are animals that feed on other dead animals, like hyenas and vultures. And the third category of a carnivore is insectivorous. They eat insects and other small invertebrates such as worms. We also have omnivores, which feed on plants and animals. And humans are generally omnivores because they eat both plants and animals. And some humans are also, they just eat vegetables. They are vegetarians. We have decomposers. Now, decomposers, they break down. Another word for breakdown is basically decompose. They remain the remains of the dead plants and animals, this is recycled into nutrients and it goes back into the environment. We also learned about energy flow in food chains and in food webs. Plants and some algae, they play an important role in the ecosystem because they capture the radiant energy from the sun and they use it in the process of photosynthesis to produce glucose that the plants and other animals can use to gain energy. The energy is passed, which is basically the sun's energy, is passed along a food chain from the producers to the consumers. And eventually the decomposers are the last link in this transfer of energy. And they release energy as heat into the environment. Now, each stage of the food chain is at a trophic level. And it is shaped in a pyramid because the higher you go up, the less energy occurs, less of the sun's energy is transferred in each trophic level. So the right at the top, the last level, has the least amount of sun's energy. Also, we learned that interlinked food chains together form a food web. So food web is where different organisms, they eat a variety of living organisms, not just one specific type. I'm going to explain to you today the balance in an ecosystem. Okay, so in this section, we will examine the balance between different trophic levels in an ecosystem. Since all organisms in the ecosystem have to rely on the resources of the area for their supply of food. Now, any area can only support a limited number of animals. You learn that also in geography, where you learn that a certain amount of area, like the demographics of geography, they can only take a limited amount of animals. We will look at ecosystems in the next slide and we'll decide which resources the animals depend on. So this slide will be only on animals ecosystem in a savanna. Now, an ecosystem can only accommodate as many organisms as its resources. That means, for example, there's only certain amount of food, only certain amount of water, and certain places that shelter that can carry a specific amount of people. And it will fail if it does not remain in balance. That means, for example, if there's too many animals in one area, but not enough food or not enough water or shelter, then it's going to become overcrowded and there's going to be imbalance in that ecosystem. So that's why we call ecosystems in specific areas with only a certain amount of living organisms in it. Now, this imbalance can be disrupted by natural and also by human factors. Natural factors include extreme changes in weather patterns and in climate, like floods, droughts, and sudden changes in the temperature. So these natural factors that affect the weather condition and the climate, they basically disrupt ecosystems and it causes an imbalance. Also, we have human factors. Now, humans include removing organisms from the ecosystem, such as poaching, and also human pollution. Now, with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, air pollution and noise pollution and water pollution, these pollution has risen drastically, and this has caused an imbalance in the ecosystem. And this is why people are now trying to tell you to conserve our um, environment and protect it so we have a balance in the ecosystem. Now, sometimes you may find like certain organisms, like flies, they fly around your house, or mosquitoes. Now, even though you may think that they are um, silly or irritating, they basically cause a balance in an ecosystem because they have certain functions in it. And these functions are basically to protect the ecosystem, even though they may be uncomfortable and irritating around you. So this is why there are specific certain organisms on this planet because they all have a certain function. And now when humans poach or when they do not look after the environment, this causes a drastic change in the ecosystem. Now, these factors, they can contribute to an imbalance, and it has a drastic, serious impact on the components, and it alters nature. And you can see this all around as it's happening because of the greenhouse effect and the certain foods that we can't eat, and like certain places have sardine runs, and it doesn't occur anymore if you live near the sea because the ecosystem has been imbalanced. So we're going to look at this balanced savanna ecosystem. So you can look at, you have bacteria and fungi here at the bottom, and then you have a zebra, cheetah, hyena. You have termites that's in the tree in the wood, and this termite is basically eating that wood up. You have an elephant. So you have all these different, and then a vulture. So if all the grass and the tree die, now think about what would happen to the zebras and the elephants. What would happen to the cheetah and the hyena? Now, why do you think this occurs? The balance in the ecosystem basically refers to how many animals it can support for long periods of time. If the balance is upset, then the ecosystem would fail. Now, one of the factors that we can look at in an ecosystem um, to see if the system is balanced is population growth of different species over time. So I'm going to ask you to please chat only on content specific information. Okay, one of the factors that we look at within an ecosystem, I'm going to repeat that, is to see if it is balanced and the population growth of the different species over time. So population of the different species will be balanced over time. Now, over time, the ecological populations interact and change within a community. All populations change over time and grow. The population growth of species in the wild is kept at balance by a number of different factors. So we're going to discuss these factors, what they are that basically balances the population growth of species. We have human intervention can sometimes cause serious damage to animal populations, and this critically endangers, for example, the ravine rabbit. There are fewer than 200 individuals left in South Africa, It only eats from a few plant types, and this habitat is restricted to where these plants are found. So, like small areas of the Karoo. Now, during the day, it hides under bushes uh, on the river, but many of its home areas have been invaded by humans or they are destroyed. So can you see how when I say humans, we affect the ecosystem? The main goal of any species is to reproduce and to ensure the survival of the species. Now, factors beyond the control of the ecosystem often influences this, and it limits the growth of the population, such as the example I used is the ravine rabbit. Now, why I used this example is because from a population of thousands, now it has become endangered because people have been intervening and causing serious damage to it. You only left from this thousands to 100 of these rabbits that are left. And this disruption basically causes an imbalance in the ecosystem, and it can affect the organisms that live there as well as the ecosystem as a whole. Now, because it can affect the ecosystem as a whole, it can actually disrupt and prevent that ecosystem from continuing, and that ecosystem would die because you need these, like plankton, for example. We have plankton in the sea. Imagine if that wasn't there, and sea creatures won't be able to live because they are the producers. They are the primary producers of food in a in a marine environment. Now let's look at the factors that they balance or disrupt the ecosystem. We have natural factors and we have human factors. We have already discussed in some detail, but let us take a closer look at the factors that disrupt a balanced ecosystem. The natural factors. Now, natural factors are like floods or hurricanes, and they can cause severe disruptions to an ecosystem. But the ecosystem will recover eventually. However, if the change occurs over a long time, a long period, like climate change or global warming, then this damage may not be reversible. I mean, you cannot go back and reverse this damage. Yes, Levi. Good morning.
Morning, ma'am.
Morning, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. And how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
There's also the natural factors also called soil erosion.
Yes, soil erosion is caused through heavy rains, so that is also a natural factor. Very good for thinking of that. Well
Thank you.
done. You're welcome. Now, an example that there may be different theories about why dinosaurs became extinct. So one of the main theories is a sudden change in climate, because you must know that the climate in the dinosaur age is totally different from the climate that we experience today. That is why we don't have the fossil fuels and the coal that was produced in those days. Remember, coal and all, natural gases were all formed from the plants and dinosaurs and living matter that occurred in the dinosaur age. But the climate has changed. This is why we don't have that anymore. So it becomes a scarce resource. Now, this sudden change, whether it is due to a meteor striking the Earth or not, it disrupted the balance in the ecosystem. So some people feel that the climate changed was because a meteor had struck the Earth. But there are different theories as to why the climate has changed. It, it, it was also an extent reason why the dinosaurs had died out. Levi, you had your hand raised?
Ma'am.
Yes.
Isn't it you said because of the climate change, that's why we don't get those fossil fuels?
Yes.
But because of the climate change, it also has to do with temperature because that's one of those conditions that that those organisms turn to fossil fuels?
You see, the organisms was because of the climate that existed at that time. So you had different types of plants and animals and different ecosystems living in that era. So
Mm.
when those plants and animals had died, they disintegrated into the ground and they went deep into the layers and they compacted together and they formed fossil fuels. And because the climate is different, we don't get those organisms anymore in present age.
So what you mean is that the process was pressure, temperature, and anaerobic and saturated conditions.
Yes, that has to do with your climate as well, because you have atmospheric pressure and all of that. That has to do with your climate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So now let's assess the impact of a natural disaster. Now, in the 1980s, a devastating drought and famine raged in Ethiopia, and it caused the death of over 400,000 people. Now, many plants and animals and microorganisms also died, and the species that depended on the water for their reproductive cycles, like amphibians, this was badly affected. And this was because of drought and famine. So, drought is when there is a lack of water. Now, if you don't have water, then you can't reproduce, and you can't, like the amphibians, it couldn't reproduce, and it caused a disruption to the ecosystem, and it affected the environment as well. Now we have human factors. Human factors were, like, many years ago, people like the sand, they had little impact on the environment, and because they used the environment to live basically, and they lived in harmony with the land, and they took their food, they only took what they could eat, they weren't greedy, they only took what they could carry. And now, as opposed to modern man tends to be, the same. They have, you eat with your eyes. Modern man tends to be greedy. They don't eat what they can carry. They eat what to look at. When they eat, they look at what looks good and then they decide to eat. Now, modern man, however, has a huge effect on nature. We clear land. Now, clearing land and cities to build roads and farms is basically deforestation. Deforestation. Now, because we're clearing those trees and we're cutting it down, we're actually causing an imbalance to the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in our environment. Just the fact by clearing land. Now, when we build cities and roads and farms, we also, and people have increased, the population has increased in certain areas, we tend to pollute the environment, and we produce waste and we litter. Now, what we need to do as young individuals is that we need to become more conscious of our environment. We need to stop littering. We need to eat only the amount of food that fills your stomach, and not be greedy, because as you grow, move into grade 9, in different subjects you're going to learn about BMI, that's body mass index. Now if you don't eat according to your body mass index and you overeat, then it's going to lead to health problems and you become unhealthy. So that's why you must find what your body mass index is and eat just to support it. And it also keeps you healthy by not eating so much processed foods. Now, humans also produce endangered animals and overharvest marine animals, and this causes a long lasting damage to the ecosystem. Now, you hear about in the news about poaching, and you hear about how the lions have been sold, and you hear about how animals in the sea have been affected by oil spills. Now, all these causes long lasting damage to the ecosystem. Yes, Levi. Okay. Now, poaching and in southern Africa and also pollution, it basically ruins ecosystems. So if you find that you know anybody that poaches or you know anybody that is polluting the environment, then you, being the future leaders of South Africa, you can develop leadership skills and you can start causes to stop them or make them aware that it is not good. Okay, and you can do that on your Instagram chats and all of that to promote healthy living in and healthy environments in our country. So we're going to move on to adaptations. Adaptations, just that word basically tells you that organisms adapt to an environment. Now, organisms in ecosystems face competition, predation, parasitism, and human influence. And all of this could affect the environment negatively, and it forces them to adapt or move away or die. It is well known that South Africa has undergone a big climatic change in the past. For example, the dry Karoo was once a swampy area, and the Kango caves in Utson was once under water. So can you see how the environment has changed over time? And it's mostly because of competition, predation, and human influences that negatively affect the environment. Yes, Levi.
Ma'am,
Hi. Yes.
it's about like the human factors, probably about how they like poach those endangered organisms. Yeah.
Yes.
So mostly we also been taught at school that mostly they kill rhinos just because of their horns.
Yes, that's true. That's rhino poaching.
Yeah. So and I was reading in my textbook. Some people, because many people in Asia believe that powdered rhino horn has medicinal properties and can cure any disease. For example, headaches, fever, rheumatism, and even cancer. Is this true?
Now that is what they believe, but it's not but it's not scientifically proven. If it was scientifically proven, um, then you won't have cancer. Am I right?
Yeah.
Now, yeah. Now there are alternatives like medication to cure headaches. So you don't have to actually go and kill a whole animal just to get its horn, because there are herbal medications as well that can cure headaches. And if you eat correctly, then you need to understand if you have a balanced body as well, not only your a balanced ecosystem, but your body as well. If you balance it by drinking the correct amount of water, you need to drink like 4 to 6 cups of glasses of water a day. And if you don't eat all those sugary and processed foods and you eat healthy, then you'll find that you don't suffer from headaches and cancer and all these sicknesses and diseases. So you also have to balance your body. Just like how ecosystems are balanced, you need to balance your body so you don't suffer from illnesses.
And
Okay.
ma'am, there's still one more.
Yes.
And they also say that poaching is mostly just for money, it's motivated by greed.
Yes, it is just for money. This is the greed of humans. So we need to change their mindset. And it
Mm.
comes from educating our young, which is you, so you can become more environmentally aware and not be driven by greed, because greed basically has destroyed our environment. You understand that?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, adaptations. Now, adaptation is a change in the structural, functional, and behavioral characteristics of an organism. So, what that basically means that when something has adapted to, has made an adaptation or has adapted, it means that its structure or its function and the way it behaves has changed, or it has adapted to suit the environment. So adaptation also allows the organisms to survive as it adapts to changing conditions and the environment. Now, because the environment changes, So the animal adapts itself to suit the changing conditions and it's able to survive in that environment. Now, organisms that are unable to adapt to changes within the environment, they basically become extinct or they die out. So like an I'm just going to relate it a little to life as well. Like how ecosystems adapt to ensure its survival of the species, then you also need to adapt to ensure your survival. Like how, for example, you in lockdown and you at home. Now you've adapted to educate yourself by watching Africa at STEM Geeks tutorials like I'm doing now. So can you see how you have also now adapted your learning in a different way? First, you used to go to school, but now because we have this virus that is out and you have to stay at home to protect yourself, then you've adapted your certain way of life. And we've become more digitally technologically advanced, where you can still learn and not lose out on anything that you learned in school by watching these videos. So can you see how you also have made adaptations to your living arrangements on your own? Now, I've explained basically and related to your life what an adaptation is, but let's look at it in the environment. When South Africa rose out of sea millions of years ago, organisms that could not adapt to new or dire terrestrial environments, they became extinct. But individuals that could adapt survived and they formed new populations. These adaptations could be changed in an organism's structure, its function, or its behavior over long periods of time. So the most important thing that you need to know here is that organism's structure, function, and its behavior changes if it wants to adapt. Only populations of organisms that happen to have suitable characteristics are able to survive in changing conditions in the environment. So if you have if like you have animals or insects, if they are suitable and they can adapt and they can change, then they can survive. And they are basically selected by nature in order to survive. So nature basically dictates which organism survives and which doesn't. Now, those species that do not adapt, they eventually die out or they become extinct. Now, since we've been in lockdown, right, and most people have been at home and factories have stopped working, now that means that there's been a huge reduction in pollution. And you've noticed that the environmentalists are people that study the environment. They are all happy in a way because now it has caused less damage to our environment and the earth is recovering from all the harm that was affected and the humans had affected, caused its effect. Now, as we have said, adaptations in species can occur in three main ways. So I want you to learn this very well. Sorry about that. Every time I want to change my highlighter, it goes off. Okay, so it doesn't seem to want to go back to where I was because my computer is glitching. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do it here on the slide and we'll try to continue. And then when my computer restores or becomes normal again, then we'll continue. I'll try one more time. Okay, so we have basically, as we have adapted in our species, we have structural changes. Now these structural changes are physical characteristics of a species, such as having long legs and strong muscles. Then we have functional. Functional means how you function in the environment. So these are species may have to carry out its life processes, like the 7 life processes you have, Mrs. Grin. Cameras off, please. Such as being how an egg has a shell outside of it and it keeps the embryo safe for it to grow. Now, the embryos can grow and hatch even if the climate changes. Okay, so you have your structural change, and then we have behavioral changes. Behavioral is the way the species or the organism behaves. Now, the species can have special behaviors that are instinctive. Now, instinctive mean which they know by instinct, that you just know, some like your intuition, or it can be learned by making a safe nest to protect their babies. So behavioral changes are basically instinctive, like you just have a feeling that this is what you're going to do, or it can be learned. That means that you can learn how to do things. And in this case, birds have learned how to make nests, and it protects their babies. So can you see how species have adapted structurally, then it has adapted functionally, and it has adapted by behavioral changes or through its behavior. Okay, now these changes take place over a long period of time within a species and must be passed on from generation to generation. Over time and over many generations, these adaptations in the individual organisms will follow the species to evolve and adapt to its changing environment. So let's have a look at how some of the plants and animals have adapted to suit the environment. Now, they've adapted basically through conservation of the ecosystem. So we're conserving the ecosystem. Environmentalists and other people, they work towards managing ecosystems, and they control alien vegetation and preservation of wetlands. Now, alien vegetation means that um, uh, organisms that do not grow in your own habitat. That means that it comes from a different habitat or a different country, and you are now planting it in your own. It's not indigenous. Indigenous means that where it grows in a specific place in your own country, and it was born there. Now, alien is taking something from some other place and planting it or placing it in an environment that it was not born in. And then preservation of wetlands. Wetlands tend to dry out. So environmentalists work together to preserve wetlands, because wetlands is basically a source of water supply for us, especially during times of droughts. Okay, individuals can contribute to conserving in various ways. For example, if they appropriately dispose of their waste, you can start recycling, you can start reusing, you can also start um, not wasting, not buying so many things that you don't really use. And instead of use what you have and repair what you have, instead of being a wasteful society. Like we currently um, are a wasteful society. All of us, even me, we tend to go do what's easy. Like for example, if something is broken, you will say, okay, well, let's just buy a new one. But in the old days, like in my parents' age, when something was broken, they would take it to a repairman and they try to repair it first. And only if it was not repairable would they replace it and buy a new one. Because imagine if you don't repair it and it can still work, then that machine or whatever you're going to use, for example, has now become waste. And then it's going to lead to bacteria forming on it, and it's going to cause lots of imbalances in the ecosystem, and there'll be too much of waste. So try not to be a wasteful society like previous generations. So our country is one of the most naturally diverse in the world. This means that it has different species and habitats and ecosystems here, and more than most other places in the world. It's actually, you know, South Africa is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It has lots of habitats, it has lots of species, it has a nice climate, and it's one of the most stable um, countries in this in all compared to all of the other countries, because our tectonic plates are very stable, and you learn that in geography, and we are less prone to all the floods and earthquakes that other countries and tsunamis that other countries normally experience. It's because we are on a stable tectonic plate. So we should be happy that we live in our country, because we actually safe from most natural disasters that other countries experience. Now, our country's natural beauty and diversity, it attracts thousands of people each year, but it's under great severe threat from poaching, like how Levi told you earlier about rhino poaching, and they do it because of certain beliefs that may not even be true. And then through our country is under threat through pollution and other human influences. Now, ecosystems are able to naturally recycle materials like water, carbon dioxide, and other gases, and the remains of organisms. And if they are left alone. But ecosystems, you need to understand that, cannot be effective if we interfere with it. That means that humans are affecting in ecosystems because they interfere with it. So we should actually tend to leave certain ecosystems, because each organism, no matter how small, insignificant, or irritating they may be, they have a certain purpose for that ecosystem to function. Now, human factors, they include habitat destruction like deforestation and also burning. People burn things if they don't want to use it, and this causes air pollution. Then pollution causing global warming. Alien invasive plants are taken from other ecosystems and put into certain areas for it to, because they think maybe it looks good. Then we have hunting, poaching, and killing of other wildlife. So this is one of the human interferences that disrupts ecosystems. There's pressures that can cause great loss in biodiversity, and some ecosystems are under strain, and others have also collapsed. Now, the question is, why should you care? There are many reasons why it's important for us humans to care about our environment. And as you've learned, everything in an ecosystem is connected. Therefore, harming one component in the ecosystem would basically have a ripple effect, and it can damage other systems, and it can also damage our life as we know it. So we must tend not to interfere. We must look after our environment, because without our environment, we cannot survive. And we actually need and we have to depend on our environment. Okay, so your homework, if you downloaded it, you would have seen this concept map. And they are basically a summary of the yesterday's lesson and today's lesson, which is interaction and interdependence within the environment. And it's a really easy way for you to learn everything you need to know about this section, and you can fill in the blanks. And by you filling in the blanks, it leads you to understanding the information better. Because sometimes you may have answers that are not correct, then you can re-watch this video, or you can look at your textbooks and you can find the right answers. And then you can use this to study for testing or examinations, or also just to increase your knowledge. Yes, Levi. Hi, Levi.
Ma'am, it's
Okay.
me. Yeah.
Yes, I know.
Um,
Hi.
about about when it comes to adaptation, they say that insects are the most successful animals in adaptation on Earth.
Yes, that means that insects can basically adapt to most environments. That means that they have a high resistance to changes that occur in the environment. So it adapts it by changing its structure or its function or the way it behaves. That's what it means.
But also about habitat destruction. They say that when humans destroy the natural habitat of an organism, the organism's existence is under threat.
Yes, that's true, very true.
Yes,
Thank you, Levi. Okay,
but
thank you.
and also, okay, never mind.
Yes, no problem. Okay, so we have balance in an ecosystem. To summarize, an ecosystem can accommodate as many organisms as its resources, like food, water, and shelter. The balance can be distributed by natural or human factors. So the natural factors included extreme changes in patterns of weather and climate, such as floods, drought, and sudden changes in temperature. And then we had human factors, and this was caused by removing organisms from the ecosystem, such as poaching. And then we have pollution that humans induce. Now, these factors can contribute to an imbalance in an ecosystem, and it seriously impacts on its compounds and it alters in nature. It basically alters nature, its nature. So then we learned adaptations in change. Okay, sorry. Adaptations is a change in structural, functional, and behavioral characteristics of a species over generations. Now, adaptation allows a species to survive as it adapts to changing conditions within the environment. Species and populations of organisms that are unable to adapt to changes in the environment will basically die out and it will become extinct. Cameras off, please. And then conservations of ecosystems. People can work together managing and sustaining natural ecosystems. Individuals can contribute to conservation in various ways, such as appropriately disposing of our waste. Like you can start recycling and you can start reusing. Now, one of the main reasons why we should conserve our environment is to for sustainable development. So sustainable development basically means that we allowing a safe environment for future generations. That means your children and your children's children are able to live in a safe, clean environment. And this is why we need to conserve and adapt ecosystems and look after our environment. So all the information for this lesson was derived from ciovela.com, and the Department of Education uses this site too for their workbooks. Okay, tomorrow is our last section for term one revision, which is microorganisms, and you'd learn about different types of viruses and bacteria and all that interesting information tomorrow. So please join me tomorrow at 11 o'clock and we can finally do our last lesson on term one. Next week, we're going to go back to doing revision for term two. And if you'd like to contact me, it's ahaffea@gmail.com. It has been a pleasure tutoring you. I hope you have benefited from this lesson. I certainly have enjoyed teaching you. And I'll see you here tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.